Buongiorno, everybody, and welcome. Welcome to the last day of Identiverse. Thank you for choosing to spend the time with us and learn about how to make an identity standard. My name is Vittorio Bertocci, and I'm here with
Heather Flanagan.
And today, we are going to share our own personal journey into making standards. It's important to remember that this is what we experienced, and there are many different paths that can lead to the creation of a standard. We hope that our is representative enough to give you some ideas and hopefully inspire you. One of the reasons for which we are passionate about this is this picture. How many of you know what this picture means? Few people, the ones that follow me on Twitter. Thank you. This picture is a slide that I typically use at the Internet Identity workshop, which happens twice a year. And in the last couple of years, I've been giving the OAuth introduction. And in order to orient people into the main specifications of the family, I just show this thing without the little triangles. And I decided that I wanted to see if I could find in practice a way to express how incredibly skewed the word standards, at least IETF, OAuth, is toward white males. The white triangles are white males. The dark triangles are non-white males, but wait, most of them, all of them, but one, are Nat Sakimura, the same person. And there's only one lone white circle, which is a woman. So we believe doing standards is hard, but we believe it's very important to get more participation. Otherwise, this is the perspective that people will perpetrate. Because once something is a standard, it becomes incredibly, incredibly impactful. People use it. And we clearly miss diversity of use. So that's one of the motivators. So what are we going to do? We are going to walk you through the entire life cycle from what are ideas that are amenable to become standards. Not everything is a candidate. And some are like low-hanging fruits, others are harder. Then we'll go through the process of how you can take this idea and somewhat make it palatable, how to actually propose it in a way that it's likely to be adopted as something that can be worked on as a standard. Then we are going to cover the process of actually building the standard, which is the most painful and one of the main reasons for all the white I have in my beard. Because reaching consensus is so difficult, but important. The process is painful, but necessary. And then finally, we'll talk about how to do the publication process. And we are going to bounce back and forth. I'm going to do the blue-collar parts, the technical stuff. And Heather is going to do the beautiful process that leads to those very nicely formatted RFC. Is this different from what you were expecting? There are other sessions right next door. If you are staying here, that's what you're going to get. OK, fine. Very good. So coming up with the idea. I don't know if you ever had this experience of going to do fuel and finding that some buttons are like completely destroyed and others are ignored. And I think it's a good metaphor for the fact that there are things that really are candidates for being standardized. Those are things that everyone has to do. Like if you own a service and you have customers that write code, if you look at your customers' code and they are writing all more or less the same stuff, that is a good candidate for adoption. Or in general, if you see that there are tasks that are recurring, or things that people get wrong consistently in the same way, that's a very good indication that that thing might be mature to become guidance, a standard that people can refer to instead of reinventing the wheel over and over again and doing loop-sided wheels in the process. I keep looking because I don't remember really. And a couple of concrete examples that actually happened in the past. One is token validation. OAuth made this beautifully open system in which it says, here I have access tokens and they do X, and just left as exercise to the reader how to decide whether you should accept such a token. And the result was like an explosion of people doing all sorts of weird stuff. And so first, we got the introspection spec that explained how to take tokens and send it back to the authorization server, like, is it yours? Does it work? And the other was, more recently, one of the specs that we'll refer to here, which is the one that I had the honor and privilege to lead through standardization. And resource verification is identification is another good example. We started just with scopes, and then we discovered that the people like to have multi-tenant systems, and so we had to find a way of somewhat namespacing stuff. And so someone, I think our photographer there, came up with the resource indicator specification. He nods, so that means I did not misrepresent.
Indeed. So, what the fun thing about RFCs, right, is there's actually several types of documents in the IETF. So there are things that just purely come from an individual who says, I have a brilliant idea, but I don't have a good home for it. Please, area director, accept my idea. And they may very well and take it on through. Those are called AD-sponsored. But more commonly, you find a home, you find a working group, and you end up having a working group item. An important thing about working group items is you sort of give up control. So you have to let your baby go. You go to school and have other people influence the way their minds and hearts are formed. All RFCs are not standards. I cannot emphasize that enough. There are several different types of RFCs, and you can only tell what type it is by looking at the metadata at the header of the document. You can have informational RFCs, you can have experimental RFCs, you can have things that have been marked historic. If you're going to see a proposed or internet standard, those only come through the IETF, because also with the RFC series, they publish for more bodies than the IETF. They also publish for the Internet Research Task Force, the Internet Architecture Board, and the Independent Submission Stream, which is where the April 1st RFCs come from, in case you ever wondered. They also publish best current practices, and those can come out of the IETF or the Internet Architecture Board. Did you move my slide?
I did that for you.
Out.
Chivalry
My
isn't
slide.
dead.
I can kill it. Give me a minute. All right. So no matter what you're doing and what kind of RFC you're starting with, it's going to start as something that you individually submit as an internet draft. And the format's usually draft, your last name, and then some kind of awesome short title that hopefully makes a little bit of sense. That name will change when it's accepted into a working group, where your last name is removed and the short name of the working group comes in. Not all internet drafts become RFCs. There are some pretty famous examples, actually. Warren Kamari did one that was fun. That is complete and utter babble, which he did on purpose to, emphasize the fact that internet drafts do not necessarily become RFCs when they grow up. So, okay, you want to take it through a working group because you really want an increased mind share in helping make sure that this idea is well-rounded and well-developed. But you don't have a good home for it, and what working groups there are have said, it's not really in our charter, it doesn't fit. What do? You can always propose a new working group. You do that by requesting a BOF, birds of a feather session. And you tell the area directors that we want this to be a working group forming BOF. And you have 3 meetings, at which point you develop your charter, you finish the charter and say, okay, we are ready, we're good to go, and you request the working group. All of this is actually documented, of course, on their website, though there's a lot of documentation on their website, so hopefully the URL will get you there a little bit faster.
All right, so let's say that you identified something that you really believe deserves to be enshrined in a standard. How do you actually do this? Well, here's what worked for me. I started with doing my research, as in, okay, I have a hunch, I have this intuition, but does it pan out? Do I have hypotheses that I can try to test to see whether indeed what I think should be standardized would be useful as a standard? And then you need to find a way to give exposure to this idea, to your research, and that typically means conferences. And in my particular case, I was lucky that I was able to get on the agenda of the OAuth security workshop, which is a wonderful event that year was in Stuttgart. And I actually managed to get my thing there, and lots of experts were there, eager to discuss, and we discussed that. One thing which is really important is similar to what Heather was saying earlier, you need to let your baby go. You might have strong opinions about this. If you are standardizing something, you are very likely very deep in the topic. You might feel that you know everything, and you usually do not. And so you need to be actually ready to receive the feedback. It's humbling. It's painful if you're a toxic narcissist, but it's necessary. And here I'll give you a practical example, which unfortunately, who knows if I'll be able to, because of this fantastic view. Yes, I will be able to. Okay, so here that's how I did it in practice. What I wanted to standardize was how to encode in a JOT format an access token. And I knew intuitively that a lot of vendors did this already. So I just reached out via mail to all my various friends across the board and asked them for examples of JOTs that actually represented their access tokens. And they generously, almost all of them, came back to me with good examples of those. And then I just put those together in a table saying, OK, here everyone is using slightly different syntax, but we are all trying to do the same thing. You can see the various rows, which represent the functionality that those various different claims are meant to represent. And so that was my research. Then what happened? I went to that nice thing, bonus points if you find me, or if you find Brian. And then I got tons of feedback, very actionable feedback, some pretty brutal. And I just applied it right away. In fact, I applied it on the plane home, because the week after, there was an IETF meeting, and in order to get everything starting, I had to present this thing, which was complicated. OK, and here this comes to a part which is one of the, I think, most difficult aspects of all this.
Sorry,
which is
that's my fault.
Ah, OK, perfect. I thought I was going to say, this is my slide. So what do you mean, this is my slide?
But it's still my fault.
It is your fault, yeah. Because the thing is, in order to propose something, in order to actually have one of those internet drafts, you have to follow a very rigid format, which has been designed probably in the 30s, in the 20s, last century.
Shut up, Vittorio.
OK, perfect. It's a format which is very rigid. There are good reasons. Again, we are talking about standards, which is guidance, which is actually applied in systems we can have a very large scale and that are very consequential. So there is no room for ambiguity, or at least we try to reduce it as much as we can. And so the outcome is that you have to do this arcane XML thing in which everything is more or less tagged. And today, if you feel hip, you can use Markdown, which is amazing. And basically, you also need to use a particular format. And there are various tools which turn this format into another format. There are tools that are used to upload stuff. There are tools that do a bit of static analysis and warn you when you made errors. They're usually not very useful. But the thing that is incredibly useful are the people in the community. While I was trying to do this, I reached out to a lot of good Samaritans. And again, I hate to bring Brian again on stage, but Brian was incredibly helpful for this. Brian, Daniel, Fett, Thorsten were all people that are veterans in this space, and they all lend a hand and somehow helped me to go through the hurdle. I wish I could say I'm an expert now, because I've done it this a number of times, but I'm not. I keep bugging him. In fact, I think he's trying to block me on Slack, but he didn't find the feature yet. So,
a quick note on the last slide. For those of you who don't know, I was the RFC series editor for 8 years, and the whole change from the ASCII-only format that they were using to something that actually transformed into HTML and PDF, that was probably the biggest thing I did in the 8 years I was there. So it was my fault. And yeah, it's complicated, but there were good reasons. So, consensus. Consensus is hard. It is pushing that boulder uphill. And unfortunately, there's no help for it, because the consensus is what makes the standard adoptable. So to get towards consensus, of course, it starts with the mailing list. In fact, all of the work on the IETF must go to the mailing list, and I must hand it over to Vittorio at this point.
All right. So the list that is in there is basically a summary of how I tried to lead the things in my case. So again, your experience might be different. But to me, the moment in which I proposed this thing, I felt a responsibility to move it forward. And so what happens typically is there is this mailing list, and someone will chime in on the document in the current state and will point something out, as in, this scenario is broken and doesn't work that way, or you should not make this particular parameter mandatory because I have this particular scenario in which I don't want that. And you have to engage in that discussion and consider what is being said, see if the person that is chiming in didn't follow some earlier conversations, and then find that earlier conversation and provide the links. So, and sometimes people will have dissenting opinions and will start doing philosophy, and you needed to chime in and try to lead things toward concrete applications that you can place in the document, as opposed to just fighting on first principles. And then, on occasion, you'll have accumulated enough of those changes that you can just update this document, and then the conversation restart with a new updated draft. And you just keep doing this, and occasionally through the year, you'll have in-person situations like conferences like this one, in which you'll meet with others that are working on that thing, and IETF has one official in-person event, actually 3 through the year. And you just keep iterating this until the number of mails about this thing are less and less. And you get to a point in which eventually you say, okay, now we ironed most of the wrinkles. It takes a very long time, but eventually it comes there.
So congratulations, you have achieved working group consensus. It was really hard, and you're not done. I'm sorry. Because at that point, the whole IETF has a chance to get a look at it. And there's good reasons for that, because often the work does actually have implications across multiple areas, and they may not have been, engaged in the work in the same way you are, so they need to see it and consider it, and that's called the IETF last call moment. Any last commentary? But wait, there's more. Then the Internet Engineering Steering Group, which is where the area directors all sit, they have to look and say, okay, really, was consensus achieved? They pretty much are the ones that call that, make any last commentary until they approve it for publication. The publication process, my favorite thing. So, yes, now you're exhausted. You've probably spent a long time getting to this point. Now is when it goes through the professional editing process. And there are a team of expert editors in the RFC editor function. And they get the documents, they have a whole queue of documents, and they start to edit. The first thing they look for is, all right, you've got references in here. Are any of the normative references to other internet drafts? If yes, you're not ready to publish yet. It's going to wait until everything can move together. That forms a cluster, and the document will be put aside until all of it moves. Once it's through that point, then it goes through a secondary round of checks, because we want more than one editor's eyes on the document, and that's called the RFC editor stage. That's when, if you have any kind of registries associated with the RFC, then they call IANA and say, hey, we've got a registry, an update, a new one, a something, and that's the stage where that happens. Then, Auth 48. Now, long ago in a galaxy far, far away, and well before my time, in the 20s or 30s, the expectation was that authors would then be given 48 hours to review what the editors had done to their documents and answer any questions. In the 8 years I was RFC series editor, I think we had one author, marvelous gentleman by the name of Peter St. Andre, who consistently hit that 48-hour mark. Otherwise, this can take a while, especially if there's a bunch of authors on the document. But then it gets through that, everybody's happy, it moves to Auth 48, done, so that the last bits, mechanical bits can happen, and then it's published.
So,
did I mention it can take a long time? So from internet draft to RFC can take anywhere from 2 to 5 years. I have seen it happen faster, but it is pretty rare. The IETF part, where it's in the working group and going through all those consensus stages, those always take the longest. And yet, they're the hardest to measure in terms of, no, when really did this idea start? When did it actually get worked on? All that. The RFC editor component generally takes 6 to 12 weeks. And that assumes no missing references or anything like that. That's the part most easily measured. And so you can go to the RFC editor's website and look at their stats and say, how fast are you publishing documents at any given moment? Because all of that is public information.
All right. So you have been super nice to stay here and not leave. So thank you. And so on, you are now being rewarded with a summary of what we said. You might have gotten the feeling that standardizing things isn't a walk in the park. But my hope is that all the things that we described aren't arcane Harry Potter, Patronus, RFC, that people say, oh, I don't know how to do it, but they are all like things that require effort and focus and commitment, but all doable. Like we are not, we have very long hair, both of us, but we are not special. And you can definitely do it if we have done it. And as I received, and I keep receiving help from the community, so can you. Like some of these things can, again, sound intimidating, like I don't know where to start. Just reach out. We are very easy to reach, like we are on Twitter. We are semi-public people, and you can definitely reach out as like anyone else in the identity community would be delighted to help new people come in and get some of those triangles to turn into rounds, change color, and all these kind of things. If you want to know more, there is one long-form article that I wrote about my Odyssey experience in creating that RFC. And you can find us on Twitter. First is Heather, second is mine. And here there's a pointer to a tweet where we are celebrating the RFC that actually happened, but I thought it's best not to show it. So, because there's adult beverages involved. So if you will ever get to this deck, you just click the link and you'll see it.
So I'm going to add one more thing. How many of you were in the passkey session yesterday? Yeah, that meant you weren't in mine, which was totally cool because I wanted to be in the passkey session too. If you have questions about other standards organizations or what they're like and how they get to consensus and what their models are, I did a session yesterday that's recorded, the deck's up. I put in pretty intense speaker notes so that you can download it and use it as reference. I encourage you to go back and look at that one. It might be useful to you.
Very good. And now we have 1 minute for your burning questions. And it's gone. Okay.
Thank you.